Hi, everyone. Welcome. So if you are new here, my name is Julie, and this is a place where we talk about what it's really like to live with chronic illnesses. Um, Last year in 2020, which was, we know what 2020 was, there was a bright spot, which is that I published a book. It's an anthology. It's called The Things We Don't Say, an anthology of chronic illness truths. There it is. And it is all about the reality of life with chronic illnesses. There are 50 pieces written by authors from all over the world, different ages, ethnicities, sexual orientations, gender identities, and a lot of different chronic illnesses. And I think it's so important to have these conversations. So if you're curious about that, you can find more at chronicillnesstruths.com, which will be in the description below. And you might be wondering what that has to do with today's video. So I know personally, whenever I read anything that touches me, that I connect with, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, I'm curious about the person who wrote it. And I thought it would be great to go a little deeper and talk to some of the people who wrote the pieces that are in the book. So today is what I hope will be one of a series of videos. Today we are talking to Charity Cole. And in the book, in an effort to help you make those connections to the authors, each author, there's a note about where they're from and a short bio. So I'm going to read that for you right now, and then we will chat with Charity. So Charity Cole is from Royal Oak, Michigan in the United States. And Charity's bio says, Charity Cole is a stay-at-home homeschooling mom who shares her story of living with chronic illness in hopes of encouraging other parents that you can live and parent well while facing ongoing health challenges. She blogs about faith, family, homeschooling, and chronic illness at gigglesandgrimaces.com. I think that's a lovely start, but let's go deeper. Charity's story is called 1-2 Punch, and it is the last piece in the first part of the book, the part of the book that is called Relationships, Family, Friends, Dating, and Sex. Although, like so many of the pieces, of course, her piece spans multiple topics and could really have gone in many places, but I personally felt very connected to what she was talking about relating to her family, and I really wanted to include it in there with that family section. She wrote about generalized anxiety and bipolar disorder and multiple sclerosis. And I thought that there was a really interesting start to the piece. So before we start talking with Charity, I'm just going to read the very beginning here. Chronic illness seems to have followed me my entire life. I grew up with a mom who lives with depression and fibromyalgia. I suffered that only to be diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, MS, in my late teens. Multiple sclerosis is an autoimmune disorder affecting the central nervous center, including the brain and the spine, so just about everything if it wants to. For me, it affected my balance and use of my right hand. It was really cool having to use a cane in high school, said no teenager ever. And I love that last line, especially because while I didn't have a cane in high school, I had other aides that brought me more of the type of attention that I didn't want, that I would have liked. And I definitely have had that issue since high school as well. But what I found most fascinating about that start is that I thought, okay, this is going to be a piece about having MS, and it wasn't. So with that little cliffhanger, let's talk to Charity and find out more. So Charity, thank you so much for being here.
No problem.
So let's get started with some basics. Can you share a little bit about your chronic illnesses and symptoms and how long you've been living with them?
My own personal ones, symptoms started around the age 15 for the multiple sclerosis. And I was technically diagnosed at 18 and was dealing with different medications and things. I remember saying that of all the times, this was the good time to have MS. Like when I first got sick, there was basically no treatment. You know, when things got bad, they gave you some steroids and you hoped for the best. And then in college, I was the youngest person in Michigan on the first interferon. And it has just grown exponentially, the options and different things. It doesn't make life perfect, but it was sure a heck of a lot better than when I was 15. um, so that was the beginning of the MS, but I ended up in a wheelchair, 15 hospital stays in 3 years. I mean, it was a lot of fun. Um, and then I found a guy that would actually marry me dealing with all of that. And we got married, and I was adamant that we were not having children, because I wanted to be this mom that was active and involved. And you can't do that with some of those different issues. And I went into remission just before, I guess it would be 15 years ago now. And I never came out. And so I had talked to my doctor, who was a phenomenal uh, specialist in MS. And he said, I'll give you 6 months off your meds to see if you can get pregnant. And that it didn't take 6 months. So we just bing, 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 had, 3 kids, and I never came out of remission. And I want to say my last appointment with him, he said something about, we know some people have a mild course of the disease. And I laughed in his face. And he's like, well, we know hormones play a role in starting it, and we know hormones play a role in stopping it. Um, and I'm a devout Christian. And so my response is, the Lord used those medications to be way better than anybody ever dreamed. So I now run. I've run a few half marathons. I mean, most people could walk faster than I run, but it's fast for me. And so things were great, like for about, for 4 years. They were really fantastic. I was healthy. I was working, I was juggling 2 kids. There was things about that stunk, but it was great. And then my 3rd daughter was born, and the delivery went great, but postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety came, and they went away. And then postpartum psychosis came. That was fun. And none of it ever went away. I kept waiting for the day that it would go away, because it was supposed to be temporary. And that little girl is 10. And it became bipolar disorder 2, which is not as uncommon as we would hope, for it to open that door for women, from postpartum depression into bipolar. So I thought I had escaped chronic illness, when the MS said, see ya, only in some ways to have walked into something worse. The bipolar has been a real jerk. It's been a real jerk.
Yeah.
I no longer am able to work. And thankfully my children are very self-sufficient. So we make life work. And my husband, oh my gosh, he puts up with a lot of crap. Oh my gosh. And he just, like last night, he said to me, no, honey, there's nobody else I would rather live this life with. And I laughed. I was like, are you kidding me? Like, do you remember me screaming at you at the top of my lungs last week? He's like, it's okay. It's like, either his memory is really short or something's messed up. But we'll take it. So that's kind of our basic story as a family. Because it is a family thing, whether it would have been the MS or it is the bipolar and the anxiety. It's a family thing.
It's not just the impact on the family, though. I felt, for me, it
Yeah.
was that connection with your family and how supportive they were, and how they inspired you to keep pushing through. That's what made me put it in the family section, because I felt like it was heartwarming the way you talked about your connections with your children. And while obviously that doesn't fix anything,
Yeah.
because these things aren't, chronic illness is not fixable. Otherwise it wouldn't be chronic illness. But it still felt so important and so central to not only the specific piece you wrote, but I could just feel your heart in it. And that was really touching.
Yeah, in my earlier days of blogging, I said often that I was really glad that bipolar hadn't come pre-kids. Because the bipolar lies to you and it tells you there's nothing worth fighting for, because people want you to fight for you, right? Okay, whatever, that's nice. But in the depths of the depression and the depths of the bipolar, you can't fight for you. The lie is that you're not worth fighting for. But when you have this 5-year-old and this 4-year-old and this 1-year-old running around, they're a lot more concrete. They're outside of your head. And they're a lot easier to fight for. I've done 4 hospitalizations with the bipolar. And thankfully I live in an area where I have access to that healthcare. Because honestly, I probably went in sooner than some did. I was at a crisis point, but probably not all the way to the precipice, because I saw these little girls and I had to fight for them. Without getting too much into my mother's story, she didn't quite get that idea of fighting for me. So I was not going to give up fighting for my girls. So if that meant going to the hospital and spending 8 horrific days or 3 horrific days or whatever it meant, I was going to fight for them. Because if I lost my battle, and there were many days I knew I was going to, if I lost my battle, I wanted them to know I had fought like hell for them.
Yeah.
And I'm not always convinced that I won't lose that battle some days. But I know I have fought for them. And they're now a little bit older. I don't know that you ever truly understand how much your parent has fought when they lose that battle, but I want them to have as much evidence as possible that I fought.
Yeah, I think it's so important for all of us to find our motivation. And for you, it's your kids. And I think that came through very clearly in the piece that you wrote. And it's obviously coming through very clearly right now. I think that's so important. And I know everyone's motivation will be different, but
Yes.
I think we all need that thing to hold on to, and it changes. It definitely changes over time. But, you know, we all need something, I think.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what made you choose to write this piece and submit it for the book?
Because my husband told me you weren't a real writer unless you were in a book.
I disagree.
I disagree too, but you know, I have always, like I told a friend who is just coming out of some of her battle with postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, is when you start to use your story to help others, that's when you start to win the battle of what it tried to take from you.
That's an interesting perspective. I feel it's so important to share our stories. And I personally struggle with this idea of, oh, it happened to me for a reason because now I can help others. I personally don't believe that, but I know a lot of people do. And if that's their motivation, I think that's wonderful. I just feel that it's so important. I wish I'd had that in my journey. I was undiagnosed. I didn't get any diagnosis that was even close to accurate for 11 years. And then it was a lot longer before I really got the right diagnoses. We're talking around 15 to 20 years for various issues. And if I can help someone else skip over some of that, I really want to do that. And I think it's so great that you're willing to talk about this, especially because as much as physical chronic illnesses are stigmatized, and boy, they really are, mental health illnesses are stigmatized so much more. And so talking publicly about that, I think talking about all of it takes a certain level of bravery. And I think speaking about bipolar disorder, which is so misunderstood, takes that much more.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a constant trying to figure out how much you want to share. You know, I used to share a lot more than I do now because I'm in a little bit different place and where I put my time. And not to say I don't have time to blog, but some of the people I spend time with, I don't want them to know how bad it gets. I don't want them to know how dark it is. But I left it out there. I keep paying for the blog hosting, and I just need to reimagine some of what and how I want to share. Because that's always your choice. It's always your choice. How much you put out there is always your choice. Because there is sometimes a price to pay, but sometimes what you get from sharing your story makes that price worth it.
That's true. But I will say it's important to remember that while you can choose what you put out there, you can't go back. Once it's out there, it's out there. And it's a struggle. I know for me, I blogged anonymously about chronic illness for many years, and I still do, but I blogged for years before starting the book, and not always consistently, and especially when I got sicker, but I did cut back. But it allowed me to speak with this feeling that I could share a bit more because my name wasn't on it. And it got me comfortable speaking about my chronic illness in a way that allowed me to consider writing this book. I don't think I would have done the book otherwise, because sharing so much felt so scary. And there's still some things I won't share with my name on them, but I definitely share more now.
Yeah, sometimes it's scary. It is.
Well, and some things aren't mine to share. You know, if there's certain situations that are either that impact somebody else or where they impacted me, and it's not fair of me to share their story, even if it does.
And that's where I am right now. A lot of what has stopped my blogging, to the extent that it is, and I'm just trying to refine my footing, is because where I spend most of my time right now is outside of the chronic illness, and the people that I spend my time with, their story isn't mine to tell. So right now I'm just trying to refine how to share without sharing what I really want to say. Like, it's amazing things, but it's not my story to tell.
I completely understand that. And who knows, maybe someday you will find a way to share it. Maybe they want to participate in a project like this, right, where they would give you permission to share their stories. Or maybe you could do a fictionalized version. I have great respect for anyone who writes fiction. I find that prospect daunting, while everyone I know who writes fiction says they can't imagine writing nonfiction. So there's some who do both, but it's rare. I'm going to interrupt for just a quick second and remind people, if you are liking this video, please click the like button and please consider subscribing to the channel below. Okay. Anyway, so I'd love to know a bit more about why you chose to start the piece speaking about multiple sclerosis and then have the main focus be bipolar disorder.
Just the way it had gone. And often I say to my husband, it's not fair that I got hit twice. I spent my teenage years fighting this. I spent college fighting this. I spent, my 20s fighting the MS, and it's not fair that I got hit twice. Um, like a 1-2 punch, because I thought I was out. I thought I was free. I thought I had escaped the MS and could just be normal for the rest of my life. And then all I wanted was a family. I just wanted kids, and I got clobbered. Um, it is honestly, if it hadn't have been for my midwife, um, and my cousin, I would not have survived. They saved my life in those early days. And especially my cousin, still continues to give me that perspective. And she and I are from a very small town, so we went to the same school. We were a year apart. She saw all that crap. She saw the first round. Um, and it just doesn't seem fair that I got hit twice. And I know there's many people that carry multiple illnesses at a time, but I can't always be totally empathetic. It doesn't seem fair.
I mean, I'll argue that it's not fair to be hit once.
Yeah, right. But
So
I thought
there's
I had
that
paid
too.
my dues. I was like, oh, we're good.
It does feel
Um,
that way, doesn't it? And that actually, I think, ties into what we were talking about before we started recording, where we were, now we're saying it, you feel like you've already paid your dues. And before we were speaking about how it feels like we might have more energy than we do. And it's all of these feelings that I know personally, I feel like I am a very active and adventurous and engaged person trapped in the body of someone who can't do any of the things that I want to do. And the mind plays tricks sometimes where it feels like, okay, I've done my bit, let's move on. Or, okay, I've got the energy today. I can do all the
yeah,
things I think I
all
could
the
do.
things.
No, 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 no. Yesterday was a
Yeah,
good day, and I took a walk and I felt so good, and I came home and I made dinner, and partway through dinner, my body just said, no, that this was a mistake. And I was in so much pain just from standing at the stove for too long, even though an hour before that, I felt like I was having a good day. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. The bipolar kind of goes in. Okay, I most of the time am medication compliant. Um, like we spoke of for my kids. Um, Sometimes I slip up, maybe not with all of my meds, but like not taking the full dose because I actually want to be able to wake up in the morning or something like that. Um, but the bipolar, partly because of that, and partly I think just because bipolar is a jerk, you hit these stretches where you feel fine. And you're like, oh, why? Like, maybe, I'm not that sick. It was all a big to do about nothing. And I had a decent stretch, and I've had a long stretch since my last hospitalization, years. Um, but I had a decent stretch, and I thought, oh, maybe I could do more. Maybe I could balance more. And then I was screaming my head off at my husband. And then I realized I wasn't actively suicidal, but I sure wouldn't mind dying. And I reached out to another person that walks the same journey. And she's like, you should call your doctor. Like, you should really call your doctor. Um, so I did, because again, I'm gonna fight for my kids, and I was surprised where I was. Like, I don't know why, because 2020 kind of knocked the snot out of everybody. And I lost both of my grandparents in 2020 outside of what everybody else was dealing with. So I don't know why I was surprised, but I was shocked that I all of a sudden wasn't doing well. So I called the doctor, and the best thing that ever happened is the televisits he'll do now. Whew, those are great. And I made the adjustment, and we're okay. But in that whole process of thinking about it is, we talk a lot, I think it's referenced many times in the book, about spoons. And I think most people with chronic illness have heard of this spoons analogy. Like, you have so many spoons for the day, and when they're gone, you're done making dinner and you're sitting down, right? That's it. You can't buy extra spoons. And if you
I'm
do,
going to
you're
just interrupt for 1 second. For anyone who
okay.
doesn't know what spoon theory is, I highly recommend you Google it. I will try and remember to put a link in the description. Spoon theory was written as a blog post by Christine Misanderando. I hope that's how you pronounce her name. I've only seen it written. And she uses spoons to represent units of energy, basically capacity. So for anybody who has any sort of chronic illness, spoons can be a really great metaphorical representation of the capacity that we have to do things. And whereas a healthy person might have 300 spoons in a day, someone with chronic illness might have 30. Someone who's healthy might use 1 spoon to take a shower. Someone with chronic illness might need 4 spoons to take a shower. So it's a really well-known analogy, and I highly recommend everyone look it up. So I'm sorry, Charity, please continue.
No, that was a great explanation. And like we were talking about, I would say I have a decent number of spoons for somebody living with chronic illness. And so I'm like, okay, I could do more. And then all of a sudden I realized, like, half of my spoons are used for self-care. Half of my spoons are used to make sure I have the other half of the spoons. Like, and thankfully, bipolar leaves the rest of my body alone unless there's a medication side effect. So I'm a runner, really slow, but a runner. And without that running and walking, I don't have the rest of my spoons. So I have to use these spoons of energy, this time, to make sure I have the rest. So I might think I have 10 spoons, or whatever the amount is, but only 5 of them are available for normal living because I have to use the others to support the rest. So much of my life is what we call self-care, and self-care can be a variety of things. It can be taking your medication, and that takes a spoon because it knocks me out. So I can't do some of the things I wish I could do. Um, it could be running on the treadmill or running outside, depending on the weather. But that takes some energy. That takes part of what I have that the medication would like to stop. And that requires choices in my medication, because the medication for bipolar, the medication for everything, has rotten side effects. And a lot of the medications I've been on cause weakness. Well, that kind of kills the running. So I have literally said to my doctor, I am not going to take those medications because the value of what I get from my running is worth more than what those medications give me.
I think that's
And that,
something that a lot of people with chronic illness can relate to, because
yeah,
so many of us have to balance side effects versus benefits. And that's the benefits don't always outweigh the side effects. We'd like them to, but they don't.
they just don't. And that's, like, for my doctor, that's kind of knocked out most of the class of a medication, which for him is frustrating. And I'm like, sorry, Charlie, figure it out, because we're not going there.
Yeah.
Because the value is so much more.
I find that self-care is constantly a balancing act, and it's a lot more calculations than people realize. Constantly thinking
It is.
things through. Okay, I want to do this thing, but then can I do this other thing later? Well, the later thing is more important to me, so should I risk doing this first thing?
Yep.
And it applies to absolutely everything in life. I find it very exhausting sometimes.
And it can apply to everything in life. And it is something that I think the general population is having to consider more now than maybe they had to consider in 2019. So it's something we all have to consider. Just sometimes the cost of that self-care is huge. when you have if not mental, chronic illness. Because like you said, okay, if I want to do this thing later, do I need to sacrifice this thing now? And if I'm not dealing with a chronic illness, maybe I don't have to consider the cost of this self-care item in order to have this self-care.
That's
There's just
true. Yeah,
there's crazy balancing act on what that is, you know?
exactly. Even
So,
today, I had to balance out what I'm going to do this afternoon because we're recording this in the morning. And I know this is taking a certain amount of energy, which means I cannot do all the things I want to do later in the day. And so it's always a matter of considering that and planning the day accordingly. And then remembering you can't plan everything. And something that might work for me one day won't work another day. Or everything's working great and then I don't know, you get some weird news or the weather changes or because for me, weather can impact how I feel. So, right, there are all these things that we just can't account for, but we do the best that we can. And it sounds like
yeah,
you're certainly considering doing as much as you possibly can. And that's so
yeah, I
important.
have a problem with stopping. And part of that is the bipolar, actually, um, because I can't stop sometimes. Because mania is a thing. Mania is not what it is in TV. Mania for me typically looks like two different things. I can't stop doing things, and I can't stop screaming at people because rage is a big issue for me. And it's something that people don't talk about, is that rage is part of bipolar. Rage is part of anxiety. Rage is part of postpartum depression. Um, and one time, my husband and I've been on medication since my daughter was just weeks old. Um, but we happened to sit down and he said, well, what does this medication do? And what does this medication stop? And the word that kept coming up was rage. This one stops the rage. If I don't take this one, the rage goes crazy. Um, so it's the mania, though. So the rage part of it, okay. And then the other part of it is I can't stop. And one picture of this that I will never forget is my now 14-year-old daughter was probably 8. And I was really struggling with the mania, but it's hard for me to identify it. A lot of times I need somebody to tell me that's what's going on. And it was around Christmas. So that's a good time to be doing things right. And I was doing all the things. And finally, my daughter said, Mommy, could we do less things? And I went, oh, oh, that could be a problem. Wait. And so I started to look at all the things we were doing. And I started looking at all of the activities or all of the projects that were undone. Like there was a cross stitch in that corner, and there was a hat being made in that corner, and there was cookies being made in the kitchen, and all of these things were undone. So that's a big thing that I have to look at. But it's often way past the point that I could stop it easily before I know it's there. So that's super fun.
But I love that idea of having somebody there who can point it out. And I've used that as well at various times in my life, including just last week, where I find that when I'm exposed to gluten, my brain fog gets really bad. And because my brain fog is so bad, it doesn't occur to me that maybe the cause was the gluten. And
Yeah.
after that happened recently, I messaged all my friends and I even posted on Facebook and I said, hey, folks, the next time you hear me complaining about brain fog, ask me if I'm having other symptoms of having been exposed to gluten. Because sometimes we need people not in our heads to point
Absolutely.
out, hey, you're having these 5 symptoms. Maybe here's what it could be, right? Or you're acting in this way in
100%.
your case. So let's take a step back. And it's so helpful to have that from people who are going to be gentle and caring about it, but also direct.
Yes. 100%. And last week on the other side, heck, when last week, 2 weeks ago, fell apart, I don't even know if it was mania or depression. It just was a mess. But my friend wanted me to come over. My God gave me a sister, and she wanted me to come over, and I said, but I'm not very nice to be around right now. Like, it's not pleasant. She was, I love you anyway. And I have literally on this woman's couch that God brought me from another country, just sat there. And she's from a culture that's more acceptable than our culture. And I just sat. Like a couple of years ago, I had a very minor medical procedure. Turns out sometimes some of the anesthesia doesn't work so well with bipolar. And I didn't know that. So I didn't know to expect any issues. And I felt fine. Like the procedure itself was no problem. And she had a brand new baby. I love babies. I mean, who doesn't love a baby you can hold and give back, right? And I didn't even touch the baby. I just sat there. And my kids were at an activity, and that's, so I would drop them off and I would come to her house and just sit there for 5 days. And every night she just made double of her food, and I brought home dinner. And like, this is so, some of that is from I stepped outside of my culture and into hers, where it was more acceptable to just sit.
I think that is so beautiful. And I think it's a great place for us to start wrapping up, because we've been going at this for a while now.
Yes.
And I just love that she can so simply tell you that she loves you no matter what. And I just love that. So before we say goodbye, is there anything else you want people to know about you? Or do you feel like you've covered what you want to share today?
I think I've pretty much
Okay.
I've pretty much covered it all. It's been a rough journey, but it's been worth it. It's been worth it. I mean, I would get rid of the bipolar part, but it's been worth it anyway.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, folks, check out gigglesandgrimaces.com, because I'm sure you will find something there worth reading, probably many somethings. And again, please like this video and subscribe to the channel below. Check out chronicillnesstruths.com to read Charity's, to get the link to the book, to read Charity's story and more. And you can check out all of the bios for all of the authors there, and see their photos as well, so you can learn a bit more about them. And thank you all for being here, and especially Charity. Thank you so much for joining and taking part in this, I guess you could call it experiment, where I am hosting, which is something I've not done before. So we'll see how this goes going forward. Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.